For 3 weeks, Rebecca had been meeting the mysterious cowboy who'd saved her life in secret. He was gentle, kind, everything the men in her frontier town weren't. But when she followed him one night to learn his real name, what she discovered in that abandoned mine would shatter everything she believed about good and evil. The man she was falling in love with was the same outlaw her sheriff father had been hunting for 2 years. The Arizona Territory sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Copper Ridge as Rebecca Sterling hurried toward the general store, her heart racing with anticipation. It had been 3 days since she'd last seen him, the mysterious cowboy who'd saved her life and stolen her heart, and tonight they would meet again at their secret place by Willow Creek. Rebecca had never defied her father before. Sheriff Marcus Sterling was a good man, respected throughout the territory for his fairness and integrity, but he was also protective of his only daughter to the point of suffocation. At 22, Rebecca felt more like a prisoner than a cherished child, watched constantly by her father's deputies and forbidden from venturing beyond the town limits without armed escort. That's why she had been traveling to visit her aunt in Phoenix 3 weeks ago when the attack happened. The stagecoach had been ambushed by 3 desperate men, escaped convicts, she later learned, who killed the driver and wounded the guard before turning their attention to her. She could still remember the terror of that moment, crouched behind the overturned coach as bullets whined overhead and rough voices discussed what they planned to do with the pretty little passenger. Then he had appeared like something out of a dime novel, a lone rider silhouetted against the blazing sunset, twin Colts blazing as he charged down the rocky slope. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes. When the gun smoke cleared, 2 of the bandits lay dead and the third was fleeing into the desert, clutching a wounded arm. Rebecca's savior had been magnificent, tall and lean, with dark hair visible beneath his black hat and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years under the open sky. But it was his eyes that captured her, deep blue and surprisingly gentle for a man who'd just killed 2 people with such deadly efficiency. "You hurt, miss?" he'd asked, his voice soft as he helped her to her feet. No, I don't think so." Rebecca had managed, though her legs felt like water and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. He'd built a fire while they waited for the rescue party her father would surely send, sharing his coffee and dried beef while carefully avoiding her attempts to learn his name. When the posse arrived at dawn, led by Sheriff Sterling himself, the mysterious cowboy had melted away into the rocks like a ghost, leaving Rebecca with nothing but a memory and a heart that refused to forget. She had thought that was the end of it, until a week later, when she found a note tucked under the loose board on her bedroom windowsill. "If you want to thank me proper, be at the big cottonwood by Willow Creek at sunset. Come alone, a friend." Rebecca knew she should have told her father about the note, should have let him handle whatever this was. But something in those gentle blue eyes had stirred feelings she'd never experienced before, and the prospect of seeing her mysterious savior again filled her with a reckless excitement that overrode her common sense. Their first meeting had been awkward, both of them uncertain and shy. He'd brought her wild flowers, desert primrose and Indian paintbrush, and they'd talked for an hour about everything except his name and the reason he'd been in that particular stretch of desert at exactly the right moment to save her life. "You can call me Jack," he'd finally said when she pressed him for something to call him. "That's enough for now." "Jack." She repeated the name to herself as she selected ribbons at the general store, trying to look like any other young woman making preparations for a social event, rather than a sheriff's daughter planning to sneak out for a clandestine meeting with a stranger. "Rebecca." The cheerful voice of her friend Sarah made her jump, nearly knocking over a display of buttons. "I didn't expect to see you in town today. Isn't your father keeping you close to home after that terrible business with the stagecoach?" "He is," Rebecca admitted, forcing a smile. "But I convinced him I needed supplies for my needlework. You know how he is about keeping my hands busy." Sarah laughed. "Marcus Sterling and his domestic daughter. Though, I have to say, you look different lately. Happier. Almost glowing. Is there something you're not telling me?" Rebecca felt heat rise to her cheeks. Sarah had been her closest friend since childhood, and she was far too observant for comfort. "Don't be silly. I'm just grateful to be alive after that attack." Sarah's eyes narrowed playfully. "Well, whoever or whatever is putting that sparkle in your eyes, I approve. You've been far too serious for far too long." As Rebecca hurried home with her purchases, she reflected on Sarah's words. It was true that she felt different. More alive, more aware of herself as a woman, rather than just the sheriff's sheltered daughter. Jack had awakened something in her that she'd never known existed, a longing that went beyond simple gratitude for her rescue. Their meetings had become a ritual. 3 times a week, always at sunset, always by the big cottonwood tree, where Willow Creek made a bend that hid them from the town. Jack would bring small gifts, a interesting stone, a feather from a red-tailed hawk, once a piece of fool's gold that glittered like real treasure in the fading light. They would talk for hours about books, dreams, the beauty of the desert landscape that most people saw only as harsh and forbidding. Jack was unlike any man Rebecca had ever known. He was educated, she could tell from the way he spoke, and his references to literature and philosophy. He was gentle with animals and respectful of the natural world around them. He had a dry sense of humor that made her laugh, and a way of listening that made her feel truly heard for the first time in her life. But he was also mysterious to the point of frustration. He deflected every question about his past, his family, his occupation. He never mentioned where he lived or what he did during the long days between their meetings. Sometimes she caught him looking back toward town with an expression she couldn't read, part longing, part sadness, and something that might have been fear. "Who are you really?" she had asked him the previous evening as they sat by the creek, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Jack had been quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped around his drawn-up knees. "I'm someone who's made mistakes, Rebecca, someone who's trying to be better than he was. Isn't that enough?" "It has to be," she'd replied, though her heart ached with the need to know more. Tonight, Rebecca told herself, would be different. She was tired of mysteries and evasions. If Jack truly cared for her, and she believed he did, could see it in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking, then he owed her the truth about who he was. Sheriff Sterling was waiting in the kitchen when Rebecca returned from town, his weathered face creased with the perpetual worry that had become his default expression since her attack. "How was your shopping trip, honey?" he asked, though his tone suggested he was thinking about something else entirely. "Fine, Papa. Mrs. Henderson had some lovely new fabric, and I found the ribbons I needed for my blue dress." Rebecca set down her packages and moved to pour coffee from the pot that always sat warming on the stove. "You look troubled. Is everything all right?" Marcus Sterling sighed heavily and rubbed his eyes. "Had another report from the territorial marshal this morning. That damn outlaw Black Jack Morrison hit another bank last week, this time in Tombstone, made off with $3,000 and killed a guard in the process." Rebecca nearly dropped the coffee cup she was holding. She had heard her father mention Morrison before. He was the most wanted man in Arizona territory, a bank robber and killer who had been terrorizing the region for over 2 years. But something about hearing that name now, on the day she planned to demand the truth from her mysterious Jack, sent a chill down her spine. "Do they have any leads?" she asked, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Same as always, vanishes like smoke after every job. But he's getting bolder, more reckless. Eventually that's going to be his downfall." Marcus looked up at his daughter with tired eyes. "I want you to be extra careful for the next few weeks, Rebecca. Men like Morrison don't hesitate to hurt innocent people if it serves their purposes." "Of course, Papa." Rebecca forced herself to meet his gaze, guilt twisting in her stomach. If her father knew about her secret meetings, he would lock her in her room and throw away the key. As evening approached, Rebecca made her usual preparations. She told her father she was retiring early with a headache, a lie that was becoming easier each time she told it, and waited until she heard his heavy footsteps moving toward his own room before slipping out through her bedroom window. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the desert landscape as Rebecca made her way to the creek. She had walked this path so many times now that she could navigate it with her eyes closed, avoiding the loose rocks and rabbit holes that could turn an ankle. Jack was already there when she arrived, standing beneath the cottonwood with his back to her, staring out across the water. Something about his posture seemed different tonight, tense, almost guilty. "Jack?" Rebecca approached slowly, uncertain of his mood. He turned to face her, and she caught her breath. Even in the moonlight, she could see the conflict in his expression, a war between desire and something that looked like despair. "Rebecca." Her name on his lips was soft as a prayer. "I wasn't sure you'd come tonight." "I said I would. I always keep my promises." She moved closer, close enough to see the stubble on his jaw and smell the familiar scent of leather and sage that clung to his clothes. "But I need something from you tonight, Jack. I need the truth." His hands clenched at his sides. "Truth is a dangerous thing, darling. Sometimes ignorance is kinder." "Don't call me darling if you're not willing to trust me with who you really are." Rebecca's voice was sharper than she intended, but weeks of frustration and growing love were demanding their due. "I'm not a child, Jack. I'm a grown woman, and I deserve to know who I'm—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Who you're what?" Jack stepped closer, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "Who I'm falling in love with," Rebecca finished, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Jack closed his eyes as if her words caused him physical pain. When he opened them again, they were full of an anguish that made her want to take back everything she'd said. "Rebecca, if you really knew who I was, what I've done, then tell me." The words burst out of her, loud enough to startle a night bird from the tree above them. "Stop protecting me from the truth, and let me decide what I can handle." Jack stared at her for a long moment, then turned and walked toward his horse, which was tethered a few yards away. Rebecca watched in growing alarm as he began checking his saddlebags, his movements sharp with barely controlled emotion. "Where are you going?" she called after him. "Somewhere you can't follow," Jack replied without turning around. "Somewhere that won't put you in danger just by being near me." "Don't you dare." Rebecca ran after him, catching his arm as he reached for his horse's reins. "Don't you dare run away from me. If you care about me at all, I care about you more than my own life." Jack spun around, his control finally snapping. "That's why I have to leave. That's why this has to end." "No." Rebecca's grip on his arm tightened. "I won't let you disappear like some ghost. If you're leaving, then I'm following you. At least that way I'll finally learn the truth." Jack went very still. "You'd do that? Leave everything you've ever known to follow a man who might be leading you to your death?" "Yes," Rebecca said without hesitation, "because a life without you isn't really living at all." Something cracked in Jack's carefully maintained facade. He pulled her into his arms with desperate force, burying his face in her hair as his body shook with the weight of secrets he could no longer carry alone. "God help me," he whispered. "God help us both." When he finally released her, his face was set with grim determination. "All right, you want the truth? Then you'll have it. But not here. Not where anyone might see or hear. Follow me, and I'll show you exactly who Jack Morrison really is." The way he said his name, his full name, sent ice through Rebecca's veins. Morrison. Black Jack Morrison. It couldn't be possible. The gentle man who brought her wildflowers and quoted poetry couldn't be the same ruthless outlaw her father had been hunting for 2 years. But as she followed Jack deeper into the desert, away from the creek and toward the abandoned silver mine that had been played out and deserted for over a decade, Rebecca felt the terrible certainty growing in her chest. All the pieces were there: his skill with guns, his reluctance to reveal his identity, his knowledge of the desert trails, his ability to disappear without a trace. The man she had fallen in love with was Black Jack Morrison, and she was following him to his hideout like a lamb to slaughter. The entrance to the old mine was hidden behind a tumble of boulders that looked natural but had been carefully arranged to conceal the opening. Jack moved them aside with practiced ease, revealing a narrow tunnel that led into the heart of the mountain. "Wait here," he told Rebecca, disappearing into the darkness. A moment later, the warm glow of lantern lights spilled from the tunnel mouth. "Come in, but watch your step. The floor's uneven." Rebecca had expected a crude cave, the kind of rough shelter an outlaw might use for a temporary hideout. Instead, she found herself in a surprisingly comfortable underground room that had been carved out of the natural cave system behind the played-out mine shaft. A bed with clean linens occupied one corner, while a rough table and chairs sat near a small cooking area. Books were stacked everywhere on shelves carved into the rock walls, piled beside the bed, scattered across the table. But it was the contents of an open chest near the bed that made Rebecca's blood run cold. Stacks of paper money, more than she had ever seen in one place, a collection of watches, jewelry, and other valuables that could only have come from robberies. And worst of all, wanted posters bearing a familiar face, Jack's face with Black Jack Morrison printed in bold letters and $5,000 reward, dead or alive, beneath. Rebecca sank into one of the chairs, her legs no longer able to support her. "It's true," she whispered. "You're really him." Jack stood in the center of the room, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. "You're a bank robber. A killer. My father has been hunting you for 2 years. Your father's a good man, Rebecca. One of the few honest lawmen in the territory. He deserves to catch me." Rebecca looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "How many people have you killed, Jack? How many innocent people?" "Innocent people? None." Jack's voice was flat, emotionless. "I've killed men who were trying to kill me, men who chose to stand between me and my freedom, but never anyone who didn't have a gun in their hand and murder in their heart." "You killed a bank guard last week in Tombstone." Jack's jaw tightened. "Harry Simmons wasn't a guard, Rebecca. He was a hired gun, brought in specifically to kill me. The bank president put a bounty on my head, and Simmons was there to collect it. When I walked into that bank, he was waiting with a shotgun. I had 2 choices, kill him or die. And the bank customers, the clerks, were they just acceptable casualties?" "I don't hurt innocent people," Jack said firmly. "I take money from banks that charge farmers 20% interest and foreclose on widows. I steal from stage lines that jack up their prices because they know people have no choice. The money I take goes to people who need it more than the rich bastards who stole it in the first place." Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. "You think you're some kind of Robin Hood? That robbery and murder are justified if you give the money to poor people?" "I think the law isn't always justice, and justice isn't always legal." Jack pulled out the other chair and sat down across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. "Your father's an honest man, Rebecca, but he works for a system that's rotten to the core. Territorial judges who can be bought, marshals who look the other way when their friends break the law, politicians who get rich while families starve. Sometimes a man has to choose between what's legal and what's right. And you chose to become an outlaw." "I chose to survive." Jack's voice turned hard. 2 years ago, I was Jake Morrison, deputy sheriff in a little town called Cedar Falls. I had a badge, a decent salary, and plans to marry a school teacher named Mary Caldwell. I believed in the law, believed that justice would prevail if good men just did their jobs. Rebecca felt her world shift again. "You were a lawman?" "I was, until the day I discovered that my sheriff was taking bribes from a cattle baron named Ezra Blackwood, ironically, no relation to your friend Black Jack Morrison, to look the other way, while Blackwood's men rustled cattle from small ranchers and murdered anyone who tried to stop them." Jack stood and began pacing the small room, his hands clenched into fists. "I tried to do the right thing. Gathered evidence, built a case, went to the territorial marshal with proof of the corruption. You know what happened? The marshal was Blackwood's cousin. He warned the sheriff, who warned Blackwood. That night they came for me." "What happened?" "They burned down the schoolhouse with Mary inside, told the town it was an accident, a faulty chimney. Then they framed me for stealing money from the town treasury and put a bounty on my head. I had a choice, let them kill me and bury the truth forever, or run and find another way to fight back." Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face again, but for different reasons now. "So you became Black Jack Morrison." "I became a ghost. Someone who could strike back at the Blackwoods of the world without innocent people getting hurt." Jack stopped pacing and looked at her with desperate intensity. "I never meant for this to happen, Rebecca. Never meant to fall in love with the daughter of the one honest lawman in the territory, but I couldn't stay away from you. Couldn't stop myself from wanting something I had no right to want." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of truth finally spoken. Rebecca looked around the cave again, seeing it with new eyes, not the lair of a heartless criminal, but the refuge of a man trying to survive in a world that had branded him a monster for refusing to be a victim. "The money," she said finally. "What do you really do with it?" Jack gestured toward a ledger book on the table. "See for yourself." Rebecca opened the book and found page after page of careful entries. Names, amounts, reasons: Widow Henderson, $200, mortgage payment to prevent foreclosure. Samuel Martinez family, $150, medical expenses for sick child. Copper Ridge School, $300, books and supplies. The list went on, a meticulous record of money distributed to people in need. "You really do give it away," she whispered. "Most of it. I keep enough to survive, to buy supplies and ammunition. The rest goes where it can do some good." Jack sat down again, watching her read. "I know it doesn't make me a hero, Rebecca. I know that stealing is still stealing, no matter who benefits, but I couldn't just disappear and let men like Blackwood win." Rebecca closed the ledger and looked at the man she loved with new understanding. He wasn't the noble rescuer of her fantasies, but he wasn't the heartless criminal of her father's wanted posters either. He was something more complicated, a good man broken by an unjust world, trying to find meaning in the pieces that remained. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you go home," Jack said quietly. "You forget you ever knew me. And you find yourself a good man who can give you the life you deserve. A man who won't bring danger to your door or shame to your family name." "What if I don't want a good man?" Rebecca reached across the table and took his hands in hers. "What if I want the man I love, whatever name he goes by?" Jack's hands tightened on hers. "Rebecca, your father will never stop hunting me. If he knew what you meant to me, he'd use you as bait to draw me out. And men like Blackwood, they wouldn't hesitate to hurt you to get to me. Then we'll have to make sure they never get the chance." Rebecca's voice was steadier than she felt, but her mind was racing with possibilities. "You said there are other honest lawmen in the territory. What if we could find proof of the corruption? What if we could clear your name?" "It's been 2 years, darling. Any evidence that existed is long gone by now." "Maybe not all of it." Rebecca squeezed his hands, her heart pounding with the audacity of what she was about to suggest. "What if we could get my father on our side? He's incorruptible, Jack. If he knew the truth about what happened to you, about why you became Black Jack Morrison, he'd arrest me on the spot. I'm a wanted man, Rebecca, with a price on my head. Your father's first duty is to the law." "His first duty is to justice," Rebecca corrected. "And if we can prove that justice wasn't served 2 years ago, that you were framed for crimes you didn't commit." Jack stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. "You want to tell your father that his daughter is in love with the territory's most wanted outlaw? Rebecca, he'd lock you up and throw away the key. Only if we tell him the wrong way." Rebecca's mind was racing now, pieces of a desperate plan falling into place. "But what if we approach him not as lovers, but as people seeking justice? What if you turned yourself in voluntarily, as Jake Morrison, and demanded a fair hearing of your case? They'd hang me before I could say a word. Not if I was there to vouch for your character, not if you had evidence to support your story." Rebecca stood up, pacing now in her excitement. "Think about it, Jack. You saved the sheriff's daughter's life. That has to count for something." Jack watched her pace, his expression cycling between hope and despair. "Even if your father listened, even if he believed my story, I'd still be guilty of bank robbery. I'd still have blood on my hands." "But you'd be Jake Morrison again, not Black Jack Morrison. And maybe there would be a way to make amends that didn't involve a rope." For the first time since she'd entered the cave, Jack smiled. A real smile, not the bitter expression he'd worn while confessing his crimes. "You'd really do that? Risk everything to help clear my name?" "I love you," Rebecca said simply. "Not the myth, not the legend, not even the noble outlaw trying to help the downtrodden. I love Jake Morrison, the man who was brave enough to stand up for what was right even when it cost him everything." Jack stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she might disappear at any moment. "I love you too, Rebecca Sterling, more than I've ever loved anything in my life. That's why I'm going to do the right thing." "What do you mean?" Jack's arms tightened around her. "I mean, I'm going to turn myself in. Tomorrow morning I'm going to walk into your father's office, tell him who I am, and face whatever justice awaits me." "Jack, no, that's not what I meant. It's what I have to do." Jack pulled back to look into her eyes. "I can't keep putting you in danger, Rebecca. I can't keep asking you to choose between your family and a future with me. If there's any chance of clearing my name, of becoming the kind of man who deserves your love, I have to try the honest way." Rebecca felt panic rising in her throat. "And if they hang you, what then?" "Then at least I'll die knowing I tried to do the right thing. And you'll be free to find someone who can give you the life you deserve." "I don't want someone else. I want you." Rebecca's voice broke on the words, "Please, Jack, please don't do this. We can find another way." "There is no other way, darlin'." Jack cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "This is the only chance we have for a real future together. If I keep running, keep stealing, keep living as Black Jack Morrison, I'll never be anything more than an outlaw with a price on his head. You deserve better than that." They stood in the warm circle of lantern light, holding each other as if they could stop time itself, both knowing that everything would change once they left this hidden sanctuary. Rebecca had come here seeking the truth about the man she loved, and she had found it, all of it, the good and the bad and the complicated in between. As dawn approached, they made their plans. Jack would approach Sheriff Sterling alone, without any mention of his relationship with Rebecca. He would tell his story, present what evidence he had, and hope that Marcus Sterling's reputation for fairness extended to wanted outlaws with nothing to offer but the truth. Rebecca would stay away from the jail, maintaining the fiction that she knew nothing about Black Jack Morrison's true identity. If Jack's gamble paid off, if her father proved willing to listen and investigate, then perhaps there would be a chance for them. If not, they didn't discuss what would happen if not. Some futures were too dark to imagine. As they prepared to leave the mine, Jack gave Rebecca a small leather pouch. "What's this?" she asked. "Evidence," Jack replied. "Letters from Mary Caldwell that prove my relationship with her, property deeds that show what Blackwood stole, even a photograph of me in my deputy's uniform. It's not much, but it's proof that Jake Morrison existed before Black Jack Morrison was born." Rebecca clutched the pouch to her chest. "I'll keep it safe." "I know you will." Jack extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness, broken only by the pale pre-dawn light filtering through the mine entrance. "Rebecca?" "Yes?" "Whatever happens today, I want you to know that these past 3 weeks have been the happiest of my life. Loving you, being loved by you, it's been worth everything." Rebecca kissed him then, there in the darkness of the abandoned mine, pouring all her love and fear and desperate hope into that single moment of connection. When they broke apart, both were crying. "This isn't goodbye," she whispered. "I won't let it be goodbye." But as they made their separate ways back to town, Jack to face whatever justice awaited him, Rebecca to wait and pray and hope, both carried the terrible knowledge that sometimes love wasn't enough to overcome the weight of the past. The sun was fully up when Jack Morrison walked through the front door of the Copper Ridge Sheriff's office. Sheriff Marcus Sterling looked up from his desk, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun when he saw the stranger in the black hat. "Help you with something?" Marcus asked, his lawman's instincts warning him that this visitor was dangerous despite his calm demeanor. "Sheriff Sterling," Jack said, removing his hat and setting it carefully on the desk between them. "My name is Jake Morrison. I believe you know me better as Black Jack Morrison. I'm here to turn myself in." Marcus Sterling's hand froze halfway to his weapon, his eyes widening as he recognized the face from dozens of wanted posters. "Well, I'll be damned," he said quietly. "The famous Black Jack Morrison walking into my office like he's coming to tea. I'm hoping you'll hear me out before you decide whether to hang me or not." Jack said. "I have a story to tell you, Sheriff. A story about corruption and murder and a lawman who tried to do the right thing. And I'm hoping that when you hear it you might understand why Jake Morrison had to die so that Black Jack Morrison could be born." Marcus Sterling studied the man standing before him, the most wanted outlaw in Arizona territory, surrendering himself voluntarily for reasons that made no sense. Something about the situation felt wrong, felt like there was more to the story than the wanted posters suggested. "All right, Morrison," Marcus said finally, his hand moving away from his gun. "I'll listen to your story, but you'll tell it from inside a cell, and my deputy will have a shotgun pointed at you the whole time." "That's fair," Jack agreed. "That's all I'm asking for, a fair hearing." As the cell door clanged shut behind him, Jack Morrison closed his eyes and prayed that Sheriff Marcus Sterling was half the man his daughter believed him to be. Because if he wasn't, if this gamble failed, then the last thing Jake Morrison would ever see would be the end of a rope. But if it succeeded, if there was even a chance of clearing his name and winning the right to love Rebecca Sterling openly and honestly, then whatever happened next would be worth the risk. The story of Jake Morrison and Rebecca Sterling was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The next few hours would determine whether their love story would end in tragedy or triumph, whether justice would finally be served or whether the corrupt system that had created Black Jack Morrison would claim one more victim. Either way, Jake Morrison had finally stopped running. For better or worse, the truth was about to come out. If this story of forbidden love and the fight for justice on the frontier touched your heart, if you believe that even the most wanted outlaw can find redemption in the arms of the right woman, then you found your home at Western Love Stories. Here, where the law was hard but love was harder, we tell tales of hearts that refused to surrender to injustice, of souls that found light in the darkest places, and of the truth that love is always worth fighting for, no matter what the odds.